Hi, I'm Liora. The day I lost my job, my husband didn't comfort me. He smirked. Told me I was finally showing my true worth. That night, he left to meet her, the woman he called an upgrade. He thought I'd beg. He thought I had nothing. He didn't know I'd just inherited $99 million from a man I never knew was my real father. But here's what stings more than betrayal: the silence they all counted on. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. And when I smiled and agreed to the divorce, that was just the beginning. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where from? I want to hear your story too. It had been raining since morning, the kind of cold Seattle drizzle that seeps into your bones, whether you're inside or out. I stared through the kitchen window, watching drops crawl down the glass like they were in no rush to go anywhere. The rain had never bothered me before, but tonight, everything felt heavy. Marcus sat across from me, chewing slowly, like he had nothing better to do. The only sound in the room was the soft tick of the clock above the fridge and the thud in my chest. I had just told him I'd been let go. After 15 years with the same firm, 15 years of showing up early, staying late, doing everything right. But none of that mattered now. Not to them, and clearly not to him either. He didn't look up from his plate. "I knew this would happen," he said between bites, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You're useless, Liora." That word, useless, like a slap that doesn't leave a bruise but burns all the same. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just stared down at the chipped edge of my plate, pretending it had something to say. My hands were clenched in my lap, my mouth dry. I felt like a balloon with the air slowly leaking out. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms with that smug little tilt to his head I'd come to know too well. "You spent years designing stuff no one wanted. I've carried this family while you played dress-up with color swatches." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "It wasn't just a hobby," he snorted. "Right." I reached for my mug, my favorite one, the one I'd made in a pottery class before we were married. My fingers trembled. It slipped. The sound of ceramic hitting tile was sharp, final. I bent down and picked it up. It hadn't shattered, just split down the side. A clean crack. I traced it gently with my thumb. "It didn't break," I whispered, more to myself than him. Neither did I. I placed it back on the table. He didn't even glance over. This was the man I'd shared a home with for 17 years. And somehow, I still found myself waiting for him to say something kind, something real. But all he did was wipe his mouth again and stand up. "I'm reassessing our marriage," he said, like he was reading it off a checklist. "Is that so?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer, just walked down the hallway, the echo of his footsteps disappearing into our bedroom. That night, I barely slept. I lay curled up on my side of the bed, his side cold and empty, even though I knew he was just down the hall in the guest room. At some point, I got up and walked back into the kitchen. The mug was still there, sitting in the middle of the table like a memory that wouldn't fade. I sat down and held it in both hands, staring into the crack. For so long, I thought staying quiet kept the peace, that if I just worked harder, gave more, stayed agreeable, things would hold together. But maybe I'd been wrong. The next morning, I heard the front door open and close. No words, no goodbye. I looked at the clock. 7:12 a.m. Right on time, like always. I poured myself some lukewarm coffee and sat alone at the table. The silence was louder than the traffic outside. When I finally opened my laptop, my inbox was already filled with polite rejections and unsubscribes. I started deleting them one by one, barely reading. Then one subject line stopped me cold. Legal correspondence from Holt Gray, attorneys at law. I clicked, expecting another spam message, maybe a class action lawsuit I forgot I was part of, but the email was short, formal. We are reaching out on behalf of our client, Thomas Everin, regarding your inheritance. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Thomas Everin. The name meant nothing to me. My father died before I was born. That's what Mom always said. He was a kind man, but he's gone now. You don't need to think about him. I reread the email. Inheritance? My hands were sweating. I stood up and paced the kitchen, the words flashing across my mind like warning lights. Had she lied? Was my whole life built on someone else's silence? I sat back down, read the message again, slower this time. This wasn't a mistake. It had my name, my full legal name, my email. Someone had gone to lengths to find me. My legs felt weak. I pushed the chair back and walked to the window. Rain again, constant, relentless. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, my breath fogging it slightly. Marcus thought I was broken, but maybe I wasn't the one who'd been lost all this time. Maybe I was just starting to be found. That thought clung to me like mist, lingering in the corners of my mind, even as the world kept turning around me. 2 days later, I stood on the sidewalk downtown, staring through the rain-streaked glass of a sleek law office. My reflection was distorted. Just like everything else lately, I barely recognized myself. Hair damp, coat clinging to my frame, fingers curled tight around the strap of my purse. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not even Marcus, especially not Marcus. Inside, the air was warm and still. A tall man in a navy suit approached the front desk and greeted me by name before I even introduced myself. "You must be Liora," he said, offering a calm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Gregory Gray. Please, follow me." His office was lined with shelves full of leather-bound books I doubted anyone actually read. The carpet was soft, the lights dimmed just enough to feel intentional. A folder sat neatly at the center of the polished desk, waiting. He gestured for me to sit, then gently slid the envelope toward me. "This letter was written by your biological father," he said. "Edward Calloway. He passed away 3 months ago." I stared at the envelope. The room felt too small. "I don't know that name." Mr. Gray gave a slight nod, as if he'd heard that before. "Your mother never spoke of him?" I shook my head. "She told me he died before I was born." He didn't argue, just tapped the envelope once, then leaned back. I opened it with slow, uncertain fingers. The letter inside was handwritten, the ink faded and shaky, like the words had come at great cost. "Liora, I was wrong to stay silent. I watched you grow from afar. I saw your strength, even when no one else did. You reminded me of your mother, fierce in your own quiet way. The company I built, Calloway Innovations, was always meant for you. There was more, but I couldn't read it right away." My eyes had begun to sting. I looked up at Mr. Gray. "Is this a joke?" He shook his head. "Inside that folder are documents confirming your status as his legal heir. His estate is currently valued at $99 million. I let out a quiet breath. Not a gasp, not shock, just confusion. I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel betrayed yet, just unmoored. "He watched me?" I whispered. "All these years?" Mr. Gray folded his hands. "He respected your mother's wishes, but he made arrangements to ensure you'd be taken care of. This letter was part of that." I held the paper tighter, fingers brushing the faint impression of his pen strokes. One sentence kept echoing. I was wrong to stay silent. How many people in my life had chosen silence over truth? The meeting didn't last much longer. Mr. Gray gave me copies of the documents and instructions to follow if I chose to accept the inheritance. I nodded through it all, thanked him quietly, then left. Outside, the city moved on without me. Cars honked, people rushed by under umbrellas. But to me, the noise was muffled, like someone had wrapped the world in cotton. I walked home. The apartment was too warm when I stepped inside. Marcus was in the kitchen, making coffee like it was a perfectly normal day. He looked up and gave me a sheepish smile. "Hey," he said, gentle in a way that immediately made me suspicious. "I've been thinking." I didn't say anything, just dropped my keys into the bowl by the door. He took a breath, the kind people take when they've rehearsed what comes next. "Maybe it's time we took a break," he said. "A trial separation. Nothing dramatic, just space." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes avoided mine. His fingers fidgeted near the edge of the counter. He kept going. "I think it'll be good for both of us. We've grown apart, Liora. We both know it." "You've found someone," I said, flat. He blinked, then forced a smile like he was doing me a favor. "She's just more compatible, that's all." "Right." He pulled papers from a manila folder and slid them across the table. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said. "Let's keep it amicable, clean. I've already talked to someone who can notarize your signature." Of course he had. I picked up the pen. My hands didn't shake this time. I signed my name. And then, while he turned to check something on his phone, I added a single line just below my signature. A clause, one I'd memorized from an old design licensing agreement, legal language granting me full rights to jointly acquired assets during the marriage. He didn't notice. He hummed as he gathered the papers, smug like he'd won something. "I'll be staying with her for a bit," he said casually, not even glancing at me. "No hard feelings, right?" "No hard feelings," I replied, my voice as even as the pen stroke I'd just made. After he left, I walked into the kitchen and found the mug, the one that had cracked. I'd glued it back together the night before. The line was still there, but it held. I ran a finger along it and whispered, "We're both still here." The apartment was silent again, just me and the ticking clock. Then my phone buzzed. Mr. Gray's name lit up the screen. I answered. "There's something else you need to know," he said. "About your father's will." My breath caught in my throat. I closed my eyes. What else could possibly be left? Mr. Gray didn't answer right away. His silence hung there, longer than it should have. Then he cleared his throat, said we'd talk in person soon, and hung up. I spent the next few days floating, not in the peaceful way, more like drifting in water too deep to stand. I kept replaying Marcus's words from that night, how clean and easy he made it sound to erase 15 years. How quickly he'd switched from husband to stranger. That Thursday morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot. It wasn't addressed to me. It was gilded in gold foil, thick like it was trying to matter. The name printed on the front read, Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Hale. I froze. My first instinct was to rip it in half and toss it in the trash, but instead, I opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to a corporate gala, a private dinner, celebrating the new vice president of Callaway Innovations. The name stung. It wasn't just a company. It was my father's company. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a spark of something else. Something new. I dug out an old black dress from the back of my closet, ran an iron over the wrinkled fabric, and told myself I was just going to look, nothing more. That Saturday night, I stood outside a luxury hotel I'd only ever seen from the freeway. Valets in dark uniforms opened doors with gloved hands, guiding guests into a space filled with crystal light and expensive laughter. I walked in like I belonged. The ballroom smelled like fresh roses and polished wood. Everything gleamed. People moved around me in dresses and suits that looked like they came with built-in confidence. I lingered near the back, just another shadow against the wall. And then I saw him. Marcus. His hair was freshly cut. His suit, new and tailored, hugged his frame like armor. He held a woman close, mid-20s, tall, polished, with a smile that had no history behind it. She was perfect, in that artificial, Instagram-filtered kind of way. I didn't know her name, didn't need to. I already knew her type. A banner hung behind them on stage. Congratulations to the new vice president, Marcus Hale. Beneath it, the Callaway Innovations logo, bold and proud. The irony almost made me laugh. Marcus took the mic after the CEO gave his usual half-hearted speech. He smiled like a man who'd never lost a thing in his life. "I wouldn't be standing here tonight without the unwavering support of my partner," he said, looking at the girl next to him like she was the prize. Laughter. Applause. "And hey," he added with a grin, "not everyone's cut out for this kind of pressure. Some people just don't have the wiring." A few heads turned. I saw someone glance toward me. "That's his ex-wife, right?" "Yeah," another whispered. "He really upgraded." I held my face still, not frozen, not shattered, just still. I didn't flinch. I didn't retreat. I smiled, small, steady, like I'd heard something amusing. I wasn't about to give them the show they were hoping for. A waiter passed me with a tray of champagne. I shook my head. The glasses sparkled under the lights, delicate and perfect, too perfect. My eyes flicked to the cracks in my repaired mug at home, the one that still held water, even with a scar running down the side. That's what I was now, scarred, but holding, time blurred. I stayed longer than I meant to. Something about being surrounded by so much falseness made it easier to observe than participate. I could see it all for what it was now. Practiced smiles, shallow toasts, empty victories. And then, near the bar, I caught a familiar face. Mr. Gray. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he locked eyes with me, nodded once, then moved toward a side hallway. I followed. Away from the clinking glasses and hollow speeches, the hallway was dim and quiet. Mr. Gray handed me a smaller envelope, sealed. "Your father asked that this be given to you. Privately," he said. I took it with careful hands, slid my thumb under the seal, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Liora, you'll be surrounded by noise. Don't let it drown you. The people you trust most will soon reveal themselves. Wait before you speak. Let silence do the work." My heart thudded, not in panic, in warning. I folded the letter, tucked it into my purse. Mr. Gray didn't say anything else. He just gave me a knowing look, then slipped away. When I returned to the ballroom, everything felt louder, faker. Marcus stood on stage again, holding up a glass. "To new beginnings," he said, voice strong. I raised my glass of water from the shadows. Silent, present. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone who'd been excluded. I felt like someone who'd been given a front row seat to a performance, and I was already learning the lines better than the actors. I started walking toward the exit. Then, from behind me, I heard his voice, loud enough for everyone nearby to catch. "Don't forget your place, Liora." I didn't turn around. "I won't," I said without missing a step. "I'm just redefining it." I stepped into the night without looking back. The door of that ballroom closed behind me like the last line of a chapter I never agreed to be in. The sidewalk was wet, the city buzzing, but all I heard was the echo of Marcus's voice, one final attempt to make me small. He'd miscalculated. Redefining my place didn't mean screaming or burning bridges. It meant walking into the fire and taking back everything he thought I'd never notice. 2 days passed, and the silence between then and now was sharper than any confrontation. I spent those hours sifting through old bank emails, account passwords, any thread that might unravel what I'd always suspected, but never had the stomach to face. By Tuesday morning, I had the key to our old house again. Not the one we shared with joy, but the one we hollowed out with resentment. Marcus had already moved into a condo uptown with his new chapter. The house smelled faintly of his cologne, like he wanted it to remember him even when he was gone. I told myself I was there to grab a few final boxes, some sketchbooks, a stack of mail, the last set of kitchenware we hadn't argued over. But the moment I stood in front of his old office door, I knew I wasn't there to pack. I was there to see. The room was exactly as I remembered. Dark-stained desk, leather chair, a bookshelf arranged like it was meant for show, not use. But it was what sat on the desk that pulled me in. A stack of manila folders, one after another, and a single thin black ledger, almost buried beneath them. It had the logo of Callaway Innovations stamped at the corner. I didn't even have to open it to feel the weight of it settle in my chest. But I opened it anyway. Inside, Marcus's handwriting filled the pages, slanted, precise. Meeting logs, project updates, payment records. Next to some entries, he'd scribbled pending, filed, or approved. Most were benign, boring even, but one entry caught my eye and held it like a hook. Transfer, proprietary design, to Hale Innovations, pending approval. My breath stilled. Hale Innovations. A shell company Marcus had mentioned years ago, something experimental that never made it past the dinner conversation stage. I had brushed it off then. Now I realized I'd been trained to ignore red flags. He wasn't just playing the system. He was stealing from it. The next 20 minutes blurred. I flipped through page after page, finding names I didn't recognize. Consultants, offshore accounts, overlapping dates, all leading back to patents filed under Callaway. Patents he had no right to touch. Some of these signatures were dated weeks before my father passed. That ledger wasn't just a receipt, it was a map of betrayal. I took out my phone, snapped pictures of every page. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I focused on the angles, the clarity, making sure each name was legible. For years, I had shrunk myself for peace, for love, for appearances. Now, I was building a case in silence. By nightfall, the house felt more like a museum of a life that had never really belonged to me. The walls were stripped, the furniture half gone. I sat on the bare floor of the living room, back against the cold wall, the rain tapping soft on the windows. I stared up at the ceiling and let the silence press into me. Every time Marcus called me naive, every time he spoke over me at dinner, or corrected my memory, or laughed at my instincts, I remembered it all. But tonight, the shame wasn't mine anymore. My phone buzzed. Mr. Gray. "Liora," he said. "We need to speak." His voice was low, urgent. I stepped into the hallway, still holding the ledger. "There's another name tied to the ledger entries," he said. "Olivia Reed." I didn't respond right away. He continued. "You know her?" My lips parted. "She's his girlfriend." "No," Mr. Gray said, evenly. "She's his partner, in every sense of the word." It felt like the floor shifted slightly beneath me. I knew Marcus was slippery. I just hadn't realized he was strategic. She hadn't been just a rebound. She was the clean face they'd built this scam around. My stomach knotted, but I kept my tone even. "Send me everything you have." We ended the call. I walked back into Marcus's old office, set the ledger down, and looked around one last time. There were still a few photos on the shelves, beach vacations, birthdays, moments staged to look happy. I could see myself in the reflection of the glass frames, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I opened my purse and took out the cracked mug. The same one that had split, not shattered. I placed it right in the center of his desk. It didn't belong to him, but he needed to see it. I whispered, still holding. But not for you. Rain fell gently as I locked the front door behind me. The air was colder than before. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. No contact name. The message read, "We know what you found." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering above reply. But I didn't respond. Not yet. My fingers tightened around the phone. The rain blurred the windshield as I started the car. I didn't sleep that night. The message replayed in my head like a warning bell that wouldn't quit. We know what you found. Not a question, a declaration. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel panic. I felt clarity, a strange, heavy calm that only comes when you realize the person they underestimated no longer exists. By morning, the sky over Seattle was gray again, heavy with a steady drizzle that softened the edges of the city. I wrapped myself in a thick coat and walked to the cafe near Pike Place. Miriam had texted me earlier. Coffee? No pressure. Just, come. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, 2 cups in front of her, steam curling from each. You look like you haven't slept, she said. No small talk. I haven't, I answered, sliding into the seat across from her. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Her eyes scanned my face, and I could feel her measuring every line, every flicker of emotion. You can't keep this all in, Liora. It's eating you alive. I looked down at the coffee and stirred it slowly, watching the cream swirl like a storm forming. If I speak too soon, they'll bury it. All of it. Every trail I found, every name. It'll disappear. Miriam didn't argue. She reached across and gently placed her hand over mine. Then find someone who can dig faster than they can cover. You don't have to do this alone. For a second, I thought I might cry, but the tears didn't come. Not anymore. Later that evening, after I hugged Miriam goodbye and promised to stay safe, I took the long way home. I needed time to think, to breathe. The air was crisp, rain still misting the sidewalks. When I turned the corner to my building, something felt off. I hesitated, then climbed the stairs slowly. My apartment door wasn't fully closed. Not kicked in, not broken, just ajar. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence speak first. Then I pushed it open. My breath caught. Inside, everything looked untouched, until I saw the dining table. The manila folders I'd hidden under my bed were neatly spread out in a fan. The ledger was open to the page with Marcus's signature, and on top, a letter. Not the kind I'd written, the one from my father, the second letter I had locked away. But now there was a new line, not in my father's handwriting. It said, "Stop looking, or you'll lose more than your job." My knees went weak for a second, but I didn't fall. I stood there, heart pounding, head spinning, but still upright. They had been here, in my home, and they didn't take anything. They just wanted me to know they could. I poured myself a drink. Whiskey. My first in years. The burn down my throat reminded me I was alive. I sat on the couch, lights off, staring out at the city from the 11th floor. The lights blinked like distant warnings. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was the inhale before the storm. I whispered, "You wanted to call me useless. Let's see how useful I can be when I'm angry." The next morning came wrapped in fog. I hadn't slept, but I'd made decisions. Around noon, my phone rang. Mr. Gray's name flashed across the screen. "Liora," he said. His voice was different this time, faster, sharper. "The board at Callaway Innovations is requesting an internal audit. There are questions about Marcus's expense reports. If you're willing, we can meet quietly." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Tell them I'll talk." I paused. "But on my terms." He agreed. "You'll be protected." I'm not looking for protection, I replied. I'm looking for the truth to be loud enough they can't ignore it. After the call ended, I sat at my desk. I stared at my hands, still trembling, but not like before. There was strength in them now. My father's handwriting echoed in my head. Let silence do the work. I looked down and whispered again, this time with conviction. It didn't shatter. Later that night, the rain let up for the first time in days. The city looked clean, washed, like something important had just begun. From the window, I noticed a black car idling across the street. Not moving, not honking, just there. Then the headlights flicked, twice, a signal. Moments later, it pulled away. My breath caught, then steadied. If they're watching me, I said softly, they'll have to keep up. Because by tomorrow, I'd be the one watching them. 1 week later, the sky above downtown Seattle looked like brushed steel, cold, endless, and sharp enough to cut. I stood outside the glass tower of Callaway Innovations, the same building that once symbolized everything I wasn't supposed to touch. Now, it was mine to reclaim. My reflection stared back at me in the front doors. Same face, different woman. Inside, the air smelled of polish and old money. The receptionist smiled politely, unaware that the woman walking in wasn't here to visit. She was here to expose. Mr. Gray waited near the elevators, immaculate in his gray suit, holding a file under one arm. "The board meets at noon," he said quietly. "They think you're here to sign release papers. They have no idea what you're bringing with you." "Good," I said, stepping into the elevator. "Let's keep it that way." The ride up was silent, except for the low hum of machinery. Each floor we passed felt like peeling back another layer of Marcus's deception. When the elevator doors opened, the boardroom came into view. A long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, a panoramic window showing the skyline. I could almost hear my father's voice in that room. He'd built this company from nothing but vision and grit. Marcus had tried to turn it into a currency exchange for his ego. The board members greeted me with professional smiles. I could tell most of them hadn't expected me to show up. Marcus sat near the center, tailored as ever, pretending to belong among them, pretending to belong anywhere. He froze when he saw me. "You don't belong here, Liora," he said under his breath, his jaw tightening. "You're right," I replied evenly, setting the folder on the table. "Neither do your offshore accounts." That got their attention. The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I opened the folder, spreading copies of the ledger across the polished table. The same ledger that had been hidden in his office, now neatly documented with timestamps and notarized summaries. Each page told its own story: transfers to shell companies, altered invoices, confidential design leaks. Every line had his initials. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is how Marcus Hale has been redirecting Callaway assets through private entities for over a year. My father's work, our work, has been stolen, diluted, and resold." Gasps. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat but didn't speak. Marcus tried to smile, the way liars do when they think charm will buy them time. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those documents are fabricated. Anyone can type up a list of numbers and make it look real." "Except," I said, sliding one last document toward him, "these are yours. Your signature appears here, here, and here." He stared at the paper. Too long, too still. I could see it in his eyes. The calculation, the disbelief that I'd finally outplayed him. "Careful, Marcus," I said quietly. "The truth leaves paper trails." For a moment, I thought it might end there. The board whispering, lawyers murmuring, Marcus cornered by his own greed. But then he leaned back in his chair and smirked, that same cruel curve of his mouth that had haunted me through every insult, every quiet humiliation. You really think I'd leave my name on those files? He said. Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. Let me show you what your little proof looks like when the whole story comes out. He plugged it into the conference screen. Within seconds, documents appeared. Altered reports, doctored timestamps, digital signatures with my name attached. Gasps again, louder this time. She's framing him, one board member whispered. She's trying to take control of the company. My pulse quickened, but my face didn't move. Marcus leaned back, satisfied. You always were desperate to be important, Liora. Looks like you finally overplayed your hand. For one awful second, I almost believed he'd won again. The same power dynamic, the same imbalance, him controlling the narrative, me scrambling to defend it. But not this time. Check the metadata, I said calmly, turning toward the IT director at the end of the table. You'll find those documents were created last night, around 11:43 p.m., from Marcus's personal IP address. A few board members looked uncertain, but one of them, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keys. The silence that followed was electric. He looked up after a minute, pale. She's right, he said. The files were generated on his home network. The room seemed to tilt. Marcus's face drained of color. Marcus Hale, the chairman finally said, voice cold and formal. You are hereby suspended pending a full investigation. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. His voice cracked with rage. You'll regret this, Liora. Maybe, I said, collecting my folder. But not today. I walked out before anyone else could speak. The door closed behind me with the kind of finality I'd never had before. As I made my way down the hall, I passed the large portrait of my father, the same one that had hung in this building since before I was born. The morning light hit it just right, reflecting my face beside his. For the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow. Outside, the city was loud again. Car horns, traffic, life moving forward. I inhaled deeply, the air sharp and cold against my lungs. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You think it's over? You have no idea what's coming. I stared at the message for a long time, watching my reflection ripple faintly in the glass of the building's front door. My fingers tightened around the phone, but my pulse stayed steady. Then let's finish what they started. Because every trap they'd set for me, I was about to turn back on them. 3 days had passed since the board suspended Marcus. The company halls were quieter than I'd ever known them. Emails came in softer tones. Conversations hushed when I walked by. Everyone knew something had changed, not just in the office, but in me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Marcus was too proud, too cunning to vanish quietly. He'd built his life on manipulation, and men like that don't stop when they lose. They plot their way back. That evening, as the city sank into twilight, my phone buzzed with a new email. No subject line, no sender name. Just one sentence in the body. Meet me at the penthouse. We need to talk about what your father didn't tell you. I stared at it for a full minute. The words were bait, cold, deliberate, the kind only Marcus would use. I should have deleted it, walked away. But curiosity has teeth, and mine had been sharpened by betrayal. An hour later, I stood in front of the building that used to be ours, the place where we'd hosted friends, planned vacations, pretended to have a perfect marriage. The concierge recognized me, but said nothing. He just nodded, pity in his eyes, as if he already knew what kind of story would unfold upstairs. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection stared back from the mirrored walls, calm and expressionless. When the doors opened, the air that met me was heavy with cologne and whiskey. Marcus was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a drink in his hand. The city lights flickered behind him, scattering across the glass like shards of broken gold. "You ruined me," he said, his voice low, controlled, almost gentle, the way a flame is before it burns out of control. I didn't move. "You did that yourself." He laughed, a short, bitter sound that carried more venom than humor. "You think the board's on your side now? You're just another naive woman with a famous last name. You inherited power, but you don't know how to use it." "Maybe," I said quietly, stepping closer. "But I know enough to see through you. You were never after me, Marcus. You were after him." He froze. For just a second, his face slipped, the mask cracking under the truth. "Your father humiliated me," he said suddenly, pacing. "He treated me like an errand boy. I begged him for a chance, for recognition, and he gave me scraps while handing you everything." "You married me to get to him," I whispered. He didn't deny it. His silence was louder than any confession. Outside, the rain began again, soft at first, then steady. It tapped against the windows in rhythm with his breathing, shallow, uneven, furious. "Do you even know," he hissed, "what that man was hiding from you? The deals he made to protect his empire. You're just another pawn in his perfect legacy." I held my gaze. "The difference between us, Marcus, is that I don't destroy what I inherit." Something snapped in him then. He slammed his glass onto the table, liquid spilling across the wood. His voice rose, trembling. "You think this is about money? About revenge? I built my name out of the ashes he left me in. You're nothing without what he gave you." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small folder, the one I'd kept hidden even from Mr. Gray. "You mean this?" I said. "Because what I have right here, this proves you weren't just stealing from the company. You were selling technology to overseas partners under fake names." His eyes widened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said. "And so will the authorities." He took a step closer, his face twisting with anger. "You shouldn't have come here." "I wasn't planning to," I replied, quietly placing my phone on the table, recording. "But you sent the invitation." That's when he did something I didn't expect. He picked up the half-empty whiskey bottle, uncapped it, and poured the remaining liquid onto the rug. Then, with the casual precision of a man who's already lost everything, he lit a match. The flame caught fast. Orange and blue tongues crawled across the floor, feeding on the alcohol, spreading toward the furniture. The smell of burning leather filled the room. "If I can't have his empire," he shouted, voice cracking through the roar, "no one will!" The fire alarm blared overhead, but he didn't move. I did. I grabbed the folder and backed toward the door. "You can burn the room, Marcus," I said, steady and clear. "But you can't burn the truth." He sneered, eyes wild. "You always thought you were better than me." "No," I said, stepping out into the hallway. "Just harder to destroy." Smoke filled the corridor. My lungs screamed for air as I ran down the stairwell, clutching the folder to my chest. And I could hear sirens wailing in the distance by the time I reached the ground floor. Outside, the night was chaos. People gathering, red lights flashing against the wet pavement. Firefighters rushed in through the lobby as I stumbled onto the sidewalk, coughing. Through the glass, I saw him one last time, a silhouette framed by fire and ruin. For a brief second, he looked almost human again. Then the smoke swallowed him whole. Rain began to fall harder, steam rising where it met the heat. I stood there, soaked, trembling, but alive. When I looked down, I realized I was still holding the same mug, the cracked one I'd glued together weeks ago. I didn't even remember bringing it with me, but there it was, clenched in my hand. I dropped it onto the wet concrete. It didn't break. By morning, the city was back to its usual rhythm, Traffic, voices, the hum of life carrying on. My phone buzzed with a new message. The sender, Mr. Gray. Marcus is alive. And he's not finished. I stared at the words, feeling neither fear nor surprise, just inevitability. A slow smile formed as I whispered, "Good. Neither am I." The next 2 weeks passed in a storm of paperwork, legal calls, and media chatter. The fire had sparked more than just flames. It ignited a public scandal. Marcus claimed the blaze was an accident, the result of stress, a spilled drink, anything but arson. And he didn't stop there. On national morning shows, he painted himself as a victim of a vengeful ex-wife, calling my actions calculated manipulation. Let them talk. Because it was time to stop surviving and start reclaiming everything they'd stolen. I stood outside the courthouse on a gray Monday morning, the stone steps slick from rain. Reporters waited behind the barricades, microphones raised, ready to pounce. I kept walking. I didn't need to say a word. My case would speak for itself. Inside, Mr. Gray met me with a calm nod. He carried the case files like they were loaded weapons. In a way, they were. Each piece of evidence was a blade aimed at the empire Marcus had built on lies. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since the night he set fire to that room," I said, smoothing my blazer. He held my gaze for a second, then handed me the folder. "Then let's end this." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Rows of chairs were filled. Board members, former colleagues, journalists, and people who once smiled to my face while whispering behind my back. The judge entered, and silence fell. Marcus was already seated, dressed in another designer suit, his expression carefully sculpted. But he wouldn't look at me. The prosecution opened strong, emails, bank statements, corporate logs, and then it was my turn. I took the stand. My heart pounded, but my voice didn't waver. "I loved my husband," I began, "but I won't protect the man he became." There was no drama in my tone, just truth. I laid out the timeline, the evidence, the moments I'd ignored, the signs I'd explained away. Then came the recording. Mr. Gray connected the speaker. I nodded. Marcus's voice echoed through the courtroom. "If I can't have his empire, no one will." A murmur spread across the room. His attorney jumped up, objecting, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The jury listened, eyes wide, jaws tight, as Marcus's own words destroyed the narrative he'd worked so hard to control. For a moment, he looked at me. That cocky mask slipped, revealing something unfamiliar: fear. When the verdict came, it was swift and brutal. Guilty on all counts: fraud, perjury, destruction of corporate property. He didn't even flinch. He just stared down at the table like it might swallow him whole. As I passed him on my way out, I didn't pause. "The empire," I said softly, "was never yours to begin with." After the trial, I didn't go home. I went straight to Callaway Innovations. The boardroom was just as I remembered. Polished wood, high-backed chairs, portraits of past executives lining the walls. Except now, my father's portrait hung front and center. The chairman stood as I entered. "Liora," he said gently, "your father's final will was clear. He named you as successor. You were always meant to lead." The words landed with surprising weight. I'd spent years believing I was the spare, the quiet daughter in the background. But maybe that silence was never a weakness. It was preparation. "I accept," I said, voice steady. He smiled. "Welcome home." Later that evening, I stood alone in my father's old office. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the tall windows. Everything smelled like cedar and memory. On the shelf behind the desk sat a small surprise: my mug, The same cracked ceramic one I'd dropped outside Marcus's burning penthouse. Cleaned, sealed, whole. Mr. Gray must have found it. Mended it. I picked it up, running my thumb along the faint scar that still marked where it had once split, and I whispered, "It didn't shatter." But I knew now. It had never been about the mug. It was about me. I sat behind the desk, letting the silence settle around me. No fire, no lies, no more hiding. Just then, my phone buzzed. A new email. No name attached. Subject: Your father's last project wasn't what you think. I stared at the screen, the weight of it pressing against my chest. And something else, too. Not fear, anticipation. I leaned back in the chair that once held a man who taught me to fight quietly, fiercely, and smiled. Then maybe my story isn't over yet. That thought followed me through the long months that came after the trial, through the still mornings, the press interviews, the board meetings that slowly grew quieter, steadier. Seattle no longer felt like a war zone. The headlines shifted away from Marcus and toward quarterly reports. The phone calls became less urgent, the silence less sharp. But I hadn't forgotten the email. Your father's last project wasn't what you think. No sender, no details. Just that one sentence that lived in the corner of my mind like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I didn't chase it right away. I let the city exhale. Let myself sleep through the night without checking the locks twice. But when I felt steady again, I followed the clue. It led me down the Pacific coast, hours from the city, past sleepy towns and quiet roads. I drove alone, window cracked, the ocean breeze curling in with each mile. The house sat tucked into a grove of trees not far from the shoreline, wrapped in weathered wood and ivy. It wasn't listed under Callaway Innovations, not even under my father's name, at least not the one the world knew. His attorney told me he bought it under a trust, decades ago, before I was even born. The key waited in a rusted tin above the doorframe. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and salt, layered with dust and memory. It was a single-story space, modest, open, filled with light from wide glass windows that faced the waves. Furniture sat covered in sheets. Tools were scattered on a workbench. Blueprints lined the far wall. It was quiet, but not abandoned. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a sealed envelope. My name written in my father's handwriting, Liora. I sat down on the small couch, sunlight slanting across my lap, and opened the letter. If you're reading this, it means you've finally learned who you are, not who others told you to be. I read the words slowly. He talked about failure, about ambition, about how the company nearly died once before I ever knew its name. He said the world had always expected loud genius, ruthless business, but he believed in something else, something slower, more deliberate. He wrote about this house, his sanctuary after a public failure, a place where he designed again, quietly, where the first sketches of the technology that would eventually change his life, and mine, were born. You were the reason I started again, he wrote, after losing everything. You reminded me that silence isn't weakness, it's the pause before creation. I held the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel left behind. I felt carried forward. In the small kitchen, I made tea. Simple, grounding. On the shelf above the sink, beside a jar of sea salt and a chipped plate, I found a mug. It was the same shape as mine, the one I'd carried, broken, through every phase of this war. But this one was whole, smooth, untouched. I smiled and walked back to the living room, placed my mended mug beside his on the windowsill. The crack down the side of mine caught the light just right. 2 mugs, one whole, one repaired, father and daughter, past and present, loss and return. I stayed there for a few days, no signal, no headlines, no pressure, just the sound of the tide and the wind through the trees. I went through the blueprints, the journals. Not all of it made sense, but it wasn't about what I could build from it. It was about what he built for me. On the last morning, I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee and called Miriam. She answered with her usual warmth. "Hey, stranger. You sound different." "I feel different," I said. "So what now?" "You going back to the board?" "No," I said, watching the waves roll in. "I think it's time I start something of my own." A long pause, then her voice softened. "Good. You always did have your father's mind, and your mother's strength." I smiled, not with pride, but with peace. People think revenge is loud, flames and shouting, courtroom wins. But real victory, it's the quiet that follows. When the noise dies down and you can finally hear your own thoughts, your own heartbeat, and know that it's yours again, not shaped by someone else's rage or fear. Marcus took my name, my peace, my trust. But he gave me something too. Without meaning to, he gave me the reason to reclaim all of it. I stood inside the doorway before locking up, ran my fingers along the scar of my mug one last time. "It didn't shatter," I whispered. "It transformed." Then I stepped outside, the ocean humming below. My phone buzzed just once. A soft chime. An email. No name attached. Just a subject line. "Sometimes the legacy they try to steal isn't money or power, it's your silence. And once you take that back, you own everything." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The wind carried the rest.